me for my voice, but I have never seen anything like it.
Do you believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
Hey, welcome to the podcast. It's a bigger one. It's a more important one. We had Alexander Haynes come on the podcast for us to talk to us about the coronavirus, the upcoming primaries, and a developing story out of Asia. So you're going to want to check out all that and more. Here he is. On the phone line right now, we have our newsman, Alexander Haynes, coming to us from Seattle in self-quarantine. Alexander, it has been a busy week, and now that we are pretty much on lockdown as a nation, I figured, let's get him on the podcast a little bit more. So thanks for coming on with us.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me on. So, yeah, we are pretty much in lockdown as a nation. If you are outside right now, I'd highly recommend to get inside. I mean, if you're out for a jog or something like this and listening to this tomorrow morning, we're recording on Wednesday evening, that's fine. But otherwise, I would highly encourage you to talk to your boss about working from home. Your classes are probably canceled. I'm not even sure if there's any school still in session. I know Kansas just canceled classes today. They're one of the last states to cancel classes. There are now 215,956 cases worldwide. There are 8,757 deaths, and 84,080 people have recovered so far.
So we have been talking about this for the past month and a half. We knew that the NBA season was going to be canceled quickly after that. Sports as a whole was canceled. It feels like it's been a month since Wednesday, but it's only been a week. And it is honestly incredible to me that it's only been a week since everything kind of shut down.
Yeah, it's felt very surreal here. I mean, it has been very, just personally, it's been very hard to just kind of see everything really slow down and shut down in Seattle. It's been a very long week since Jay Inslee. I mean, last week, schools were still in session, and they're not considering a shutdown inside of the affected counties. And Friday, the announcement came that all schools statewide are going to be mandatorily closed, that it's that bad. And then a week later, we're already getting to the point where hospitals are running out of equipment here. They're doing, basically, they're going to hardware stores, one hospital is, and they are making their own face shields for doctors. Other hospitals are starting to see a massive influx of patients. I know one of my friends in Colorado, she is a confirmed case there, and she said that her doctor was overwhelmed with phone calls in the first 10 minutes of opening phone lines this morning. Colorado is definitely probably going to be another state that we're going to see a lot of cases in. And it's probably best that schools were closed because a lot of cases are starting to come from children. There is data that is coming out that shows that students, children specifically between the ages of pre-kindergarten to about 14, so the beginning of high school, are affected, but mostly they get asymptomatic to negligible symptoms, whereas once you start to get over the age of 14, you start to see some more severe symptoms. And of course, anybody is susceptible to getting severe symptoms. We have seen multiple people who are younger become very ill. And specifically concerning is Florida and Italy, and I'll get how they're connected in a second. But in Italy, we are seeing in France too, we're seeing a massive influx of patients who are 20 to 30. And that is an age that previously we did not see a high spike of in the statistics in Japan, Korea, and China. We did not see that age group. So the kind of presumption was that the younger people are not going to get as seriously infected. Well, Italy and France have proven that to be wrong. What happened was this age group, they stayed out, they continued to go to bars, they continued to go to restaurants, they continued to party in the evenings because of the notion that younger people will not be severely affected. And now Italy, now that unfortunately, that they've turned through a lot of the older people and a lot of the older people are passing away, they're now getting to a higher influx of younger people who are in very serious conditions. That connects to Florida. I know there is a CBS news broadcast. It's going a little bit viral on Twitter. You've probably seen it if you're listening to this. Of people in Florida are out on the beaches partying, and news crews went down and interviewed them, and they're like, "Yeah, if I get sick, I get sick." a lot of people dismissing it as no worse than the flu. Talking to somebody who has it, this is definitely worse than the flu. This is your breathing condition goes way down. Your oxygen levels will plummet. My friend, her oxygen levels are at 93% right now. Very difficult to breathe. She cannot walk and breathe and talk at the same time now. So this is not just the flu. The conditions we're seeing are very, very bad now that we've had about a month outside of China where we've been able to see just firsthand some of the stories that are coming from patients. It is very highly concerning, so nobody is invulnerable from this disease.
Now, you mentioned Seattle. We talked a little bit about Colorado. We look at New York and Miami and Chicago, all major travel hubs. Is that a coincidence that these major travel cities are the ones that are getting hit the hardest by this disease?
No, I don't think so. I think there is definitely a connection between travel and between where people are going to get it, where it's going to get hit the hardest. I believe the Midwest will probably not get as bad as the New York and the Chicago, Colorado, Washington, Los Angeles. But one of my big concerns is New York, actually, and Maryland specifically, because we have seen, unfortunately, one of the reasons we're seeing a big influx of cases there is because of religion, and some of the churches there continue to host services, and this was about 2 weeks ago. They continued to host services, and some of the priests, I know at one church there's a priest who came down with the disease, and he had served mass to 500 people. There's several other churches that have connections to cases, and that is very worrying because that's what we saw in South Korea. A lot of the outbreak in South Korea was connected to only a multiple group of churches, and it was even worse in South Korea, I should say, because of the secrecy surrounding some of these churches. It wasn't a regular church; it was a cult in South Korea that started most of the outbreak there. But it was able to spread from there into other churches, and a lot of those churches in South Korea went online. And I know that most churches in the States have started to shift towards alternate services, or if they're smaller, I know some of them are still holding, but they're not doing they're making sure that there's no cross-contamination during communion. I know a lot of mosques have shut down, and they're taking some really historic precedent to make sure that their attendees stay safe during this virus outbreak. But that's specifically, Maryland is specifically going to be an area of concern. New York, it sounds like there may be a shelter-in-place order put in order in the next coming 2 days. I know the governor is considering that. And for those who have not been following this, New Rochelle is the first place about a week and a half now, which feels like so long ago. They've been the first area to be put under quarantine by the National Guard, where the National Guard is in control of New Rochelle. Fortunately, things are going very smoothly there. People are getting tested there. People are able to get groceries. The National Guard is handing out enough food, so things are going smoothly in New Rochelle. However, outside of New Rochelle, it may not go that smoothly all the time.
So let me ask you a question, because we have been preparing for this, you and I and everybody that listens to the podcast, the fans of the podcast that tune in every week when you come on, we've been kind of preparing for this. We kind of knew what was going to happen before it really, I think, fell through, and the entire nation kind of got swept up in this. Has it been as bad as you expect, or has it been worse or better?
It's been a lot worse than I expected. I did when I first heard about this. Let's go all the way back to. I actually heard about it in December before I left Hong Kong. And at that time, though, it was not coronavirus. It was a different strain of coronavirus. It was just SARS, the SARS that we saw in 2003. The rumor was that it was breaking out again in Wuhan. Fast forward a month, and we hear about it in China. The lockdown comes at that time. I still had a feeling it would hit the United States, but it really did not occur to me that it would be this bad. And it really wasn't until it started to break out in South Korea and several other nations at that time in the Pacific Rim that I realized how bad it was going to get. And this is the once in a century pandemic that we're going to get. I did not expect it to be this bad. And I think that's really, I don't know if many people expected it to be this bad, other than hopefully some officials kind of prepared for it. But mentally, it's very hard to, I mean, because when we talk about statistics, and you have to think that each of those statistics represents a human being, it is a very hard concept to wrap your mind around, to consider that almost a quarter, and we'll probably be at 250,000 people infected come next Monday or Tuesday, hopefully not before then, but it's inevitable. And you think that that's somebody who has been infected, and you try to wrap around a number that big and that many people. It is very hard for the human mind to do, to consider what's happening to the economy, just the numbers. Just today, every single gain that has happened during the Trump presidency has been wiped out. The Dow Jones is now lower. It ended lower today than when he was inaugurated. And to consider that that has happened in the span of 25 days is very hard to wrap your mind around. There's one story that I think kind of captures it very well out of the New York Times. It was, and I tweeted it out yesterday for anybody who wants to find it, but it's about a group that went rafting through the Grand Canyon 25 days ago. They left, and this was an adventure. They had no contact. They had one satellite phone, where they just send off, they couldn't receive messages, but they just send off messages to families saying, hey, we're safe, we're doing good. And they knew about the virus, of course, and at that time, 25 days ago when they left, all it was Wuhan was going into lockdown, and China was reporting that numbers were subsiding, and they assumed that maybe it'd be something in China when they left, but they had no idea that 25 days later, when they would come out of the Grand Canyon and see what was happening, the world was shutting down, airlines were getting canceled, people were getting laid off in mass, there was a run on toilet paper out of all things, people were panic buying, and we were seeing something that we have really never seen before in history, just because of all the social connections, the globalization that we have now compared to even 100 years ago during the Spanish flu. This is just a very historic event that I hope, I mean, we have not seen the worst of this, but I hope that it does not get much worse than this in the coming month.
Now, when we were doing these podcasts weeks ago, we were saying that, like, you need to make sure you wash your hands, you need to make sure that you stay away from people. I didn't think that we needed to tell people not to buy all the toilet paper and paper towels at their local Dollar General, but here we are.
Yeah, and that's one of the confusing things to me is there's no need to buy toilet paper when you see it. And I've talked to a couple of people about it who are smarter than I, who have a little bit of background in psychology and kind of the stock market psychology, if you will, about and basically what they told me is this is very comparable to a bank run. That when something tragic happens that you cannot get your mind around, which is exactly what is happening, when something that is completely unprecedented, that you don't have any control over, there is a natural human reaction that you want to control something. You want to feel like you're doing something about it. And it's very hard, unless you're a doctor, even if you're a doctor, it's very hard to do anything about this right now. So the reaction was to go and buy toilet paper, and people saw a global rush on that. And as far as I know, it actually started in Hong Kong with a internet rumor that that because of the epidemic in China, that the toilet paper manufacturers were shut down, and that toilet paper was going to run out soon. And so people rushed to buy toilet paper there. And then that spread to Australia, which saw multiple fights and a large outbreak of people going for toilet paper. And then it just kind of spread definitely throughout the United States. I still don't understand why you need so much toilet paper. Toilet paper is not a scarce item. You do not need it. But I think that the explanation that it's really just it's kind of like the sheep method. We're all, you see one person do it and you feel like this is the way that I can control it. And if you did go buy out a bunch of toilet paper because other people weren't, you actually needed toilet paper. I'm not going to sit here and call people sheeple because that's just completely silly. It's a natural human reaction, and I get it. At the same time, you don't have to do it anymore. We'll be okay. There will be toilet.
And I think that's honestly all we really need to look for, Alex, is will there be toilet paper in the future? All right, let's move on to the stock market because the economic side of this stuff has been very interesting to me. What was, I think, in a lot of people's mind, without the coronavirus, I think that we knew that there was going to be a little bit of dip in the stock market in the first and second quarter of this year, no matter what, just because of the tax cuts, the tax breaks that were given earlier in 2018, that at some point, though, that money's going to have to come back. You're going to need to bring money in some way, and that the stock market was going to take a little bit of a bump going into the election in 2020 in November. We did not, however, foresee a coronavirus, a pandemic that tanked the United States stock market so hard. Worldwide, though, is this going to be one of those ripple effects like the economic disaster of 2008? Where it's going to take us a decade to get out of this, or could you see this being a bounce back in the next 3 to 5 years?
It's going to be very difficult, and I'll go through a couple of different scenarios just because we are unfortunately only a month into this, and it's like I said earlier, it's going to get worse, but how much worse is the question, and that all depends on people taking control measures, staying home, staying clean, staying hygienic, and that's what it's going to depend on. The more people do that, the quicker that we will recover out of this. Unfortunately, and I do have to say this before we get into the economics. Unfortunately, enough research has come out that has me convinced the virus will not die out because of the summer, that it is at a point where there's too much community transmission to control people unless you put everybody on a lockdown and you test absolutely everybody and isolate everybody. We're not going to see this eradicated until there is a vaccine, which is still probably far off until the summer of 2021. I know that sounds very apocalyptic, that this is going to be something with us for the next year and a half maybe. Because even in summer 2021, we still have to package a vaccine and get that to all corners of the globe. Madagascar doesn't have a case yet, and neither does Antarctica. Very few other countries do. I've discovered that there's some countries I've never heard of that have cases this week when I'm going through the statistics. So that's how much this has impacted every single part of the globe. And also how much work that scientists, that doctors are going to have, that we are going to have to do to help people across the globe recover so we can start recovering as an economy. The economy is going to change, definitely, after this. The world that we're going to see after this is all over is going to be very, very different. And it's probably going to be dramatically different. I don't see a case right now where we're going to see the same travel measurements. We're going to see entirely new ways of air travel. We're going to see not new ways of air travel, but the economy of air travel is going to look entirely different. I know there's one rumor circulating the kind of the economic circle right now that the major airlines will be bailed out, but a lot of the fly cheap, the cheaper airlines that are not as big, that the government is going to let them die, and we're going to see a major slowdown in domestic travel may skyrocket in prices after this. That air travel will not be anywhere similar to the way that it was pre-COVID, and there will be a pre-COVID and a post-COVID way of traveling. The same will go for the way that we look at cars and trains. And that all kind of, I don't want to get too far off into a tangent, but that all goes into how the economy is going to go. So breaking down a couple of scenarios here. The first one is that come fall, we will see a recovery. By some miracle, we will see a slight recovery come fall. And that because this is an outside event, the difference between 2008 was that was a cyclical recession where it was kind of, I don't want to say it was destined to happen, but it's a little bit destined to happen. It's, if you study economics, I'm sure I don't study economics particularly, but I just want to throw that out there because I know there's people listening who will understand this better, but it's cyclical. Every so often there's going to be a recession. In 2008, 2009, there was a recession because it just was that time. It was due. And I hate simplifying it that much, but I'm going to leave it at that. Now, this was an outside force. A lot of people were saying there was going to be a recession. There was going to be a recession. It felt like it was due. And it never came up. And the investors I was talking to, they felt very good about the economy. Even before this all hit, when we first saw this about 3 weeks ago that it was going to start to hit the states harder, people were talking like, okay, this is an opportunity. The stock market will go down. Good time to buy low in futures. Good time to buy low in medical companies, as sadistic as that sounds. It's a good time to buy in long-term investments, low because it will eventually go up. And we saw the stock market, and I believe we talked about this a little bit last week, that it was very reactionary at that time. One day you got bad COVID news, tank. The next day, Super Tuesday, went right back up because of that new, reactionary news. Well, right now, because of the way that this virus has turned, every single piece of news is connected to coronavirus in almost every single way. There's very few stories right now that are not connected to the virus because it is all affecting us so much. Now, because it is that outside force, we could recover quicker. There could be a global effort because everybody's involved. This is not just the United States. This is the United States, China, Italy, France, Spain, England. Russia might be the only, and their economy is bizarre as ever, and Vladimir Putin decided that he wanted to be president longer. But they closed off borders the earliest. They may be the one country that gets out of this fairly fine. They have 154 cases, I believe. But every other country, and they're not as globally connected as other countries are. So we're going to see a massive global effort together to try to recover out of this economic dip, and that might help us avoid a recession. Yes, there will be a recession for the next year and a half. It will probably be, I'm estimating that we'll be able to get out of this in 5 years, but that is dependent on getting a vaccine in a year and a half, and also that it does not get, it's going to get worse, but that does not get dramatically worse where we see social chaos. And that's going to be the next, next item that we're going to go through is, or next scenario, is what happens if there is a global, I don't want to say a breakdown because I don't think it's going to get to that level, but what happens if we see massive calls for change? What happens if we see a kind of a global revolution of how economics work? That is a very, very real possibility now, that we see such a breakdown happen that people are really going to call that the United States is no longer in power, that because our reaction was 3 to 4 weeks late, that the United States is going to suffer exponentially more. The United Kingdom is still probably about 3 weeks behind the United States. They're just closing schools this week. The United Kingdom, I'm hearing, does not have a reaction, does not have a plan. The doctors over there are absolutely mortified of what is about to happen. So because of that, the United Kingdom, they're going to get hit hard, and what they're going for is almost a herd immunity. And because of that some of these countries that we've seen as the quote-unquote staple world powers since World War II, they're not going to be the staple world power anymore just because of the way that this is going to affect the economy. So with that, we could see countries like China. If the U.S. and China parts ways with the global supply chain, and the United States moves to more production out of Mexico and South America, China very well could rise as a superpower. The economy could really we could just hit a status quo in the United States and really just kind of turn into an internal, I don't want to say it will get bad as the Great Depression. It very well may, though, and we could be on a long 10-year journey of soul-searching of where our nation is going to go after this. It could really get that bad, and I hate to sound that pessimistic when we're only a month into this, but those are the two scenarios, and I hope and I pray that it is the first scenario where we see a recovery in 5 years. Things will look different no matter what, because one of the things is that this is showing a lot of the different holes in the economy, a lot of different holes in the quote-unquote establishment, and a lot of the problems that a lot of people face. This is kind of laying bare all the wounds of almost all the countries in the world. There's going to be change called for, and it depends how quickly we recover out of this and how much we want to work together once we're out of this. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, well, it's an informed answer, and that's, I think, what the listeners, and that's really what I'm looking for. What could you say to us, Alexander, about the service industry in this country who now are filing for unemployment. There's a lot of people going in for workers' comp. I saw a really bad story on Twitter where this guy was working at a hotel at a Marriott, and instead of just laying him off, they just reduced his hours to 0, so he can't go get unemployment benefits, but he also can't work because they're not scheduling for hours. It seems like the service industry in this country, the thing that has been a backbone since the 50s, honestly, that looks like it might change dramatically after this.
Yeah, it will, and I hope those jobs will still be available, but tourism and travel are going to go down for probably about the next 3 years. 3 to 4 years, we're going to see a decline in travel, which means those service jobs that rely on a boom in people traveling and globalization, because that's what a lot of economists and a lot of the service industry, a lot of the hotels, the cruise liners, the restaurants were relying on is people traveling. People want to travel in a globalized world. We were more connected than ever, and nobody saw this coming. And well, people did see this coming. I know Bill Gates
saw this coming.
We did. Bill Gates saw this coming for years. He's been talking about a global pandemic that we're not prepared for probably since 2014, 2015. He has since resigned from Berkshire Hathaway and Microsoft, and he's going to focus on combating this. That's how big of an event he sees this as. It's going to change. Those jobs are probably not going to be there. We're going to have to take a different look at how people work, at what people work at, and how we're going to connect in this economy. We're going to have to find new ways for people to be employed because we do not want to see unemployment in the nation right now could reach 20% by next week. And that is huge. The other problem is that a lot of those people, like the story you shared, where he's not unemployed technically, his hours are just at 0. We're going to see a lot of people like that. So the way that we prepare jobs and the way that we look at jobs is going to dramatically change. And we're going to have to get very creative about how people are employed and about the services that we see. And that's, I want to try to be positive a little bit. And I think that's one thing that is very resilient about humans, is that there will be creativity that comes out of this. People will find new ways to work. People will find new ways to make money. People will find new ways to share ideas. I know there's a million stories about people who have been in pandemics before who created great things. Isaac Newton founded calculus during the plague. Other people have written many famous plays have been written because somebody was quarantined and they didn't have anything else to do. We will recover, and I don't have a great answer to where the service industry is going to go other than down, or where those people are going to go. But I also don't think that the economists right now have an idea of where those people are going to go. It may be that we see more people moved into technical jobs with automation, with automated cars, with automated travel, with automated factories. We may see a rise in doctors and a need in healthcare. And we may see more people kind of move into the analyzing and see this people prepare for this more. That's always been a theme after pandemics, is there's always been a push for more hygiene and for looking at the way that we live to see how can we prevent this in the future? How can we stop this from happening? That's probably going to be on our generation's mind until the last person in our generation passes away. And probably the next generation after us will also have that focus. Major hygiene revolution took place after the Black Plague in the 1400s. In the 1900s with the Spanish flu, there were entire movements of people who got together to focus on how can we ensure that everybody has access to hygiene, and how can we make sure that this is a staple and a standard of American life.
So another big topic that's been discussed online, and again, when we talk about discussions on an online forum, it might be one person with a big megaphone. It might be 1,000, 100,000 people all sharing the same idea. You don't really know when you're going on these forums. But a big issue, I think, for a lot of people, younger people on the line, has been celebrities and the ultra-wealthy being able to be tested while the rest of us potentially are asymptomatic, potentially don't show any signs of the coronavirus. But we don't know because the testing is not readily available. where are you sitting right now where guys like Idris Elba, Tom Hanks, the entire NBA can get tested at a whim, but you and I are having a tough time even getting a doctor's appointment?
Yeah, so there's two things to point out here. And Tom Hanks and Idris Elba was Idris Elba, was he in the United States or was he in the United Kingdom?
I don't know.
Okay. So the one reason that Tom Hanks got tested was because he was in Australia. Everybody right now in Australia is not everybody, but everybody who has symptoms, who thinks they may have it, or who has been in contact is getting tested. Right now, testing in the United Kingdom is not as good as, say, South Korea, but more people are getting tested there. So there's not rich or poor, you're getting tested. South Korea, you're just getting tested pretty much. Even if you don't think you have it, you're getting tested. The United States is running out of tests. They have to have you have to get to a certain point in getting sick and being put on a ventilator until you get tested. You have to be at that point before you get tested. I know my friend in Colorado, she did not get tested until today. And she's at the point where, like I shared, she cannot walk and breathe at the same time. That's how bad you have to get because they're rationing tests. The United States did not prepare for this. And that goes to show kind of how despicable it is. And I'm sorry, I really don't have any other way to present it. But the Oklahoma City Thunder, Oklahoma has very little tests. I believe the Oklahoma City Thunder team took up about 25% of all the tests in the state of Oklahoma when they got tested. I believe more are coming. I know the University of Washington, they're leading the nation at tests at just over 2,000 a day. Meanwhile, while South Korea is testing, and because they prepared it, and South Korea is the pinnacle of treating this, they're actually at a point where they are stabilizing. They have done a very good job at testing everybody. But other states, you gotta think states like California has a lot of tests, and New York does as well because they're bigger hubs. But you gotta be very concerned about, one of my biggest concerns is after the travel ban was announced by President Trump that that they were going to cut off air traffic between the European Union and then later the United Kingdom, people panicked and they didn't think that they'd be able to get home. So we saw people just paying insane amount of money for flights to get in. And we saw lines that were 4 to 6 hours long at almost every single major nationwide airport, Dallas, Fort Worth, O'Hare, all the big New York airports and DC airports, SeaTac, LAX. And one of the problems with that is because they were screening people. Well, you can catch it, and then it takes about 12 hours to incubate. So if one person in there was asymptomatic and spreading it, that's spreading it to a whole lot of people. And then they're just going to go back to their states. Because if you land at O'Hare Airport, you may live in Ohio, you may live in Wisconsin. You do not necessarily live just in the Chicago area, in the Illinois area. So people are going to be spreading this to Midwest states that have barely any testing at all, that do not have the capability to catch and control the testing. And that just goes to show how poorly the United States has anticipated this, how poorly they have planned, how poorly they have prepared medical staff and just the basic equipment. The reaction right now is, and that the fact that like the Brooklyn Nets are getting tested, and I hate to say that it's sad to see somebody getting tested, but it's a mess right now, and I don't know how better to put that other than it's an absolute tragedy.
All right, you asked me before we started recording a little bit about what was happening in Texas, so I'll give you a quick synopsis of Texas, and then I want to talk about the primaries in the little bit of time we have left with you. Quick synopsis of Texas, quick synopsis of Central Texas, I should say. Austin and San Antonio both have drive-through. I don't expect that to last more than a couple days, maybe a week, before they run out of just resources. So Central Texas is going to be in a tough situation. I think a lot of people around here still aren't taking it 100% completely serious. I think even in a college town where you have a lot of people who think that they're really smart, or even really smart people, they're not, I think, fully grasping how serious of a concept this is, how serious of a situation it is. And then, of course, you got to think about everybody who's gone to Port A and South Padre and Galveston and all over the Texas coast who are going to be coming back to college towns. Waco and Baylor have already said they're doing the rest of it online. TCU the same way. I think A&M, Texas, and Texas State are all on the fence. I think they're going to start leaning towards just the rest of the semester. Everybody's going to be online. Cool for me. I can wake up whenever I want, knock out my coursework, knock out 15 podcasts a day. But I think for the rest of us, it's going to be kind of rough.
That's I've heard, because you have 2 cases in Hays County. Is that correct?
We have 5 cases in Hays County.
5. Oh wow.
5 confirmed.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of, I think, what a lot of towns are going to be experiencing, especially in the South. I know it's something that has not, it did not readily start in the South. It's kind of been either a Northwest or a Northeast thing, or a big LA thing. And I really, if you're in the South and you're listening to this, really please take it seriously, because you do not want to turn into a Seattle where our hospitals are starting to overrun with people at the ICU. You do not want to be that in Central Texas or in Houston or in Louisiana.
Let's move on to the next round of primaries. This feels like the end of the Bernie campaign. We talked about that a little bit last week. But now with this coronavirus, it's going to be a real crapshoot to figure out who can get to the polls, who's going to end up voting. What are some of your projections for Tuesday?
Yeah, so we've seen several states like Ohio cancel their primaries, and it's kind of probably going to become an ongoing thing. And I know that a lot of people are calling on Bernie to, and I saw one tweet reporting before this that there is divide in the Bernie camp that Bernie just mail it in and to go ahead and unite against Trump and to fight against, because right now, if you're a Democrat and you're looking at this, Donald Trump kind of controls the narrative, because there's so much focus pushed onto the White House, pushed onto what is going on with the coronavirus. And that is one thing that a lot of people are very upset with, is that 14 to 17 days ago, Donald Trump was at a rally calling this a hoax, comparing it to the flu, being very nonchalant about it, saying that we had complete control of it. Meanwhile, 14 days later, he has admitted that this is out of control, that this is going to be a massive problem, and kind of Fox News has definitely pivoted that way too, where they were saying it was a hoax 14 days ago, going along with that narrative, just kind of playing along. And for a lot of people who support Trump, they're going to go along with this narrative. And that's one of the, if you're a Democrat and you're looking at this, that's going to be one of the important things to look at, is that they want to get a lot of swing voters out of the coronavirus. And they want to be able to pull a lot of people to their side because of the abysmal response and the abysmal reaction. Specifically, one of the facts, considering that that the pandemic response team was fired in 2018, and that a lot of those positions have been left entirely empty. And so that is something that the Democrats can get a huge momentum swing on. So that a lot of people have started to call for Bernie to drop out, so we can just forget the primary, so that people do not have to worry about getting to the polls. And so that, because Biden, and it was Wednesday night. Yeah, it's Tuesday. This is how long days feel now. Last night, Biden ended up sweeping Arizona, Florida, and Illinois, in just massive victories. And we're seeing a lot of people just go out. They see that Biden is ahead. He's getting more endorsements, and they're just kind of check the box, move on, let's move on. And I think that's where the Democrat Party is. I would not be surprised if the podcast is up and this is all mute because Bernie has dropped out of the race. And I feel like it's coming, but there's still a side in the Bernie camp, according to reports, that are very adamant that because the instability that the coronavirus has caused, there could be a chance that Bernie gets the nomination. So we'll see what happens. But I'm thinking right now this is Biden versus Trump in November, and the campaigning starts now. That's what my thinking is at.
All right, before I let you go, give a shout out to the beach goers who said, "Screw you, Alexander. I'm going to have a fun time at the beach."
Yeah, definitely. There's one other story that I want to mention, but I will get to the beachgoers. If you're at the beach right now, stop. First, quarantine yourself for 14 days because the chances are you've been around at least 100 other people. You pass by a lot of people when you go to a Miami beach or just any beach in general. You touch a lot of surfaces. This can survive in the air for 3 hours and can survive on surfaces for up to 3 days. Odds are is that you have it. Even if you feel asymptomatic because you're at the pinnacle of health, you have no lung damage whatsoever. Odds are is that you can pass it along to somebody else. And what you don't want to pass it along to is your parents or your grandparents or your sibling who may have a precondition, unfortunately. So be responsible and quarantine yourself for 14 days. Find a way to do that, even if it means checking into a hotel. You do not want to pass this on to your family who will, and have literally passed it on to other family members because even though we're staying by ourselves for 14 days, I know a lot of people do not have the ability to sit still for 14 days. You're going to have to train yourself to just sit still for 14 days, go out to the grocery shop only when necessary. And that does not mean panic buy, just plan. Just plan. Don't panic, plan. If you still think that you can go to the beach, stop. Just don't go to the beach, please. This is for the greater good of the country. If you don't go to the beach now, you can go to the beach next year. But if you do go to the beach now, that beach will probably still be closed next year because we're probably going to be suffering of this because you were selfish and you went to the beach. I'm sorry to be so blunt.
Thank you again for coming on the podcast, Alexander. You had one more story for us. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So this is a developing story, but it is going to be massively important in the coming, and it kind of plays into the economics of what is happening between the United States and China. There's a lot of controversy right now because the White House is very adamant that this should be called the Chinese virus. And I'm not going to go into all that because I think we can all make up our own minds about why that's a bit irresponsible. But yesterday, China revoked the press passes or press credentials for the New York Times, Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. So if you are a United States citizen and you're working for any three of those companies, you can no longer report in China, Macau, or Hong Kong. So they have 10 days to leave the country and return to the United States. That is a huge blow to press freedom. It is specifically a bigger blow to press freedom because Hong Kong has always been under, and Macau as well, have always been under different immigration status. But this also confirms that that it's been China making the immigration decisions. We saw during the Hong Kong protests, several human rights watchers have been turned away at the border, as well as a couple journalists have been turned away at the border. This is going to be a developing story probably over the next coming months. A lot of it is going to center around the coronavirus. And a lot of it is also going to involve Taiwan. For those of you who don't know the history of Taiwan, Taiwan is an independent country right now, but they believe that, or China believes that Taiwan belongs to China. And there's a lot of history there that I can go talk about at a later time, but I'll leave it at that for now. Anyway, there is a faction, from what I am hearing, and from what I understand, I know the thinking, because everybody's kind of panicked, the thinking is trending towards that there's going to be a hot war between China and Taiwan sometime, and it's probably going to be a decade from now. The thinking is that timeline has been moved up because there is a PLA faction that is very adamant. They are ready and willing to go to war with Taiwan, and they are pushing the war drums inside of China. That is going to be, I'll just leave it at that. That is a developing story, but it's going to be a very, very important story to how we, as a world, recover from the coronavirus, and also what happens between the great superpowers and if this coronavirus leads to World War III.
You can follow him on Twitter at ACL Haynes on Twitter. Alexander, always great to talk to you. I will talk to you again next week if we have a next week.
Sounds good. Have a great night and stay safe, everybody listening.
Hey, thanks again to Alex for coming on the podcast. Thank you, the loyal listeners, guys and gals who are washing your hand and quarantining and doing everything you can to stop the spread of this virus. Look, I read a horrible story out of New York earlier today. Newborn baby got this coronavirus. It was a trachea infection, and it was in ICU. I didn't see how the story developed. All I saw was that, And that was enough for me to know that I'm going to continue to do my part to try to stop the spread of this virus. We've already gotten to the point now where I think we've passed the point of no return, that this is going to continue to get worse and worse and worse before it can get any better. Doctors are working around the clock to figure out this cure for a disease that we don't really have any clue of how to prevent except for not coming in contact with each other. And I know that that's rough, and I know that that's a tough thing to kind of handle for a lot of people, but I've always been fascinated by FaceTime and Skype and how it has came in a time where you can be mere seconds away from being face-to-face with somebody is incredible. And I think that more people need to take advantage of that. I've had people call me day and night, FaceTiming me, since we've been on kind of self-quarantine. So that is something I suggest. We have a bunch of other podcast content out right now for you. Because we're all in self-quarantine, because we're all in social distancing, this would be a perfect time to catch up on some of our podcasts. So if you haven't been a fan of the podcast before, we have a lot of great stuff for you, breaking down the top players of this past decade in the NBA, some sporting news, and then, of course, a movie review for you guys, too, because I'm giving it to you a day early. You're welcome. All that and more, you're going to want to check out all the podcasts that we've put out. The entirety of the library of podcasts is pretty great. So, thanks again to Alex. Thanks again to you. I will talk to you guys tomorrow.